The process that we've started, and this will all be in your written material, is we start with interviews of our clients, be it their attorney and or their client, to review the case history, learn as much as we possibly can about what they know about the judgment debtor. What are their habits? What are their personalities? I know one of the cases that we worked that was one of my favorites, we recovered a substantial amount of personal assets from the debtor because I had found out during the interview that he was a big game hunter and liked to go to Alaska on these big game hunts. So when we raided his house with a writ of execution with the Sheriff's Department, we found a lot of high-powered hunting rifles, a lot of other equipment for hunting, and several trophies. And the fact that we actually confiscated those things, I think, led to the ultimate recovery. Has anyone ever read the book The Art of War by Sun Wu? One person. I like to quote Sun Wu a lot because what he says in The Art of War actually applies to most judgment enforcement cases. And my favorite quote from Sun Wu is, "Take from a man that which he cherishes, and he will follow your ways." So what I'm looking for is I want to find that red 1957 SL 500 Mercedes convertible that Dad had to get when he got successful and was where he could have some toys. It doesn't really matter whether that used Mercedes has any equity in it or not. It's something that's close to his heart. Now, it may be the wife's grand piano. It may be the art collection. It may be the stamp collection. But there's something they're particularly fond of. And once you confiscate that, it sort of sets the stage. This is serious. We're here to accomplish the objective of the court, and that is see that the judgment creditor gets their money. Once you've established the posture, and they no longer, it's just joking and kidding back and forth and seeing what we can avoid, and they've got to get down to really business, you can get some things accomplished. So we want to learn as much as we can about the people. I'm as interested in the psychographics as I am the demographics, because it helps us with the flavor of the case. We want to review the judgment. I want to know whether or not it is a litigated judgment that's been adjudicated by the courts, or if it's a default judgment where the judgment debtor just failed to show up and defend themselves, and the award was issued based on the fact that there was no defense. Because if it is a default judgment, the first defense is, once we start taking assets, first thing you're going to say is, well, I never knew about it. Nobody ever told me. I was never served. And the courts tend to let them have their day in court. So sometimes you actually have to go back and have a trial and get another judgment. So I want to know all of that background. If they've acknowledged the judgment, if there's been correspondence during that time, it's still a default. There may be enough to show that they had full well good knowledge of what happened. So we want that background information. Once we get that, the first thing my research department's going to do is start doing computer research. And those searches will give us a good overview of our judgment debtor based on their name and social security number. We'll find real estate, where they've lived for the last 3 to 7 years, sometimes longer. We'll find out whether they own or did own that property. We will get information about motor vehicles that they own or have owned. We'll get liens and judgments, whether or not they have bankruptcies on their records. A list of business entities that they are or have been associated with. We may find airplanes and watercraft. And those are excellent starting places, but I always say these comprehensive searches, as they're called, from the public databases are a tool. I always say they're a lot like a polygraph in the hands of a good examiner. It's a place to get started, but it's not the end-all and not the be-all, and it's not the final answer. It gets you started in the right direction. We then, in the next phase, the next part of the process is public records research. all of the leads we've got for where they've lived. We want to do that. Let me just move this forward. We want to research the public records, get copies of the deeds. I'm interested not only in property where they live now, but in property where they have lived, because when they moved from the old property to the new property, they may have owned or may have rented. But if they owned the other property, we assume they sold that and bought a new place, right? Not necessarily so. They may have kept the old property and using it for rental income. You can only homestead one property. That's the one you're living in or intend to live in. So that one's free and clear. And speaking of homestead, that's a mistake that a lot of attorneys and investigators make. They think if the property's homesteaded, you can't take it. Not true, with few exceptions. Texas and Florida are states with 100% homestead exemption. There's some ways to get around that occasionally, but most of the time they get full homestead exemption in those two states and a few others under some circumstances. But generally speaking, a state like Colorado, where the homestead exemption is around $50,000, that just means if you take the house and sell it, the homeowner gets the first $50,000. Then you've got to pay off the first deed of trust, any second deeds that are on it, and whatever's left after you pay all the liens that are on the property is yours to apply to the judgment. Okay? So just because the property has a homestead on it doesn't mean that you can't take that property. So we've got to get all these public records. We want to look for motor vehicles. We want to look for all the titles to boats, planes, and so forth. So we've got good tools to give the attorneys to start executing against. It's at that point, once we've done a good public records search and have documented as many of these assets as we can, it's at that point that we have to start partnering with an attorney. So particularly if there's a contingency portion of our compensation, I want to select the attorney and know full well that they have the skills to do the post-judgment work. Many times the attorneys that get the judgments are still trying to do the collection work. We just terminated a large law firm here in town that had won a $3.2 million judgment, had worked on it for about 3 or 4 months after that, had billed my client over $32,000 in post-judgment legal fees, and to show for that, they had recovered a gross sum of $1,825. Not a good return on your money. So with the client's blessing, we terminated that firm, brought in some post-judgment enforcement specialists, and are moving forward with the case. So that's kind of where the partnership starts with the attorneys. Any questions up to this point? Yes, sir. Yes. Oftentimes the attorneys that win the judgment will call us and say, you know, we need help in locating and documenting assets. And now that I've been doing this for a long time, this is my 47th year of doing financial investigation work, and every case we find out what we don't know because there's so many ways that people can hide money. But we got a pretty good idea of what the process is. And I will ask the attorney right up front, are you comfortable doing the post-judgment enforcement work, or is this an area that you're having to do because your client asked you to, or is this something that you're experienced in? And many times I've had the attorneys that won the judgment say, if you've got somebody that knows how to do this, I would love to have them take over the collection portion so we can get back to litigating and doing the things that we typically do here. Used to, we got an awful lot of our work directly from the attorneys that won the judgment. Nowadays, we probably place more work with attorneys than we get from attorneys because our clients come from all over the United States, and their assets may be here, they may be somewhere else, or the clients may be here and the assets somewhere else. But the short answer is yes, we get a good bit of referrals from attorneys that may have the case or know somebody that does, but we get a lot of them from the actual judgment creditor or from their CPAs or other professionals that are involved. Does that answer your question?
Right, but follow up.
Yes.
Is there a minimum amount
Is there a minimum amount judgment that we will take? the answer is no, there's not a minimum, but from a cost-effective standpoint, my experience is if it's less than $50,000, they probably need to have a collection agency or somebody that does consumer work, because we do no consumer work. We don't repossess cards or collect credit card debt. We just do commercial judgments. And it seems to make more sense from that figure up. The largest one I've ever personally been involved in was $3 billion, but that's an exception. Most of them are anywhere from several hundred thousand to several million.